safety topic that we are going to cover today in this video uh, discussion. So the topic is all about the guidelines for opening the companies back in this current situation that we are into right now. Now, if you do some research, you can find a lot of literatures, a lot of references in the internet that you can refer to when you develop your own strategies in restarting your organization. I know that as health and safety professionals, this is our role, our job to come up with these guidelines and strategies that our company should adopt. Now, one of the guidelines that we will look into this video is the guidelines that was sent out by or shared by OSHA, or the Occupational Safety and Health Administration of United States of America. So we will try to understand, or we will try to get some information on what are the basic strategies that companies should adopt when they decide to restart their organization. Now, let's look into the guiding principle that OSHA has written on the guidance document itself. So, of course, the first consideration is for us to carry out hazard assessment. Now, this is basic in occupational health and safety. We need to identify the hazards that our workers are exposed to. And in this context, we know that the hazard that we are dealing with this time is the COVID-19 virus. And we know already that we need to focus on the transmission. Okay? So when we carry out hazard assessment in our organization, let's try to focus on the areas where the transmission would take place and would result to contamination. Let's start from where our workers are staying or living. Okay, so we need to understand if there's any potential source of transmission from their homes, going to the workplace, inside the workplace, and going outside of the workplace. So this is one area that you need to look into in your hazard assessment. Of course, second, we need to understand their job nature or their job function in our organization. Are they directly dealing with other staff? Are they going to be associated with other group of people in the organization? Are they going to the ones who will be involved in receiving deliveries or packages in your company? So this kind of areas you need to identify. So in short, if you can detail each job function in your organization in the assessment process, that would be great. So try to list down, okay, the job functions that you have in your organization, and try to understand where the areas that the potential of transmission would take place. And of course, if you will be able to do that, then you would be able to incorporate the practical control measures that you can implement to protect your staff. So that's the entire point of carrying out hazard assessment. Once we have done our hazard assessment, the next guiding principle in OSHA is about hygiene. And we know that hygiene, or the practice of good hygiene, is already part of the control that we can implement into our organization. Now, this is nothing or something, not something new to us, because this is like all over the internet that we know that these are the steps in hygiene, good hygiene practices against this virus. Okay, but for the purpose of this video, when we talk about hygiene, we talk about hand washing, we talk about the respiratory etiquette when we are sneezing or coughing. When we talk about hygiene, we are talking about the cleaning regimen or how frequent the cleaning should be done, and of course the disinfection process. Now, in the hygiene controls, we need to understand, okay, based on your hazard assessment, which areas would require frequent cleaning, which areas would require like once a day cleaning, twice a day cleaning, or even more than that. So you need to identify that in your hazard assessment. Of course, when you think that the area has the most number of traffic, then that is very clear that you need to have a periodical type of cleaning, or maybe you can dedicate a group of cleaners to do the disinfection process regularly. But you also need to take into consideration on this part of hygiene that whenever there will be a suspected case, what are your company's emergency or strategies in dealing such kind of exposure to your workplace? So it needs also to be written down what are your immediate response when you learn that there was a potential of transmission or contamination within the workplace. Okay, so these are examples of hygiene. Of course, when we talk about hygiene, it talks about proper hand washing and provision of an area to for hand washing. Of course, it needs to have soap, and of course it needs to have paper towels or means of drying. And if the provision of washing is not there, we need to provide them with hand sanitizers. Now it can be from 60% or 70% alcohol content of your hand sanitizers. And that's basically it for the hygiene guiding principle. So another guiding principle, which again is a control measure in preventing or in minimizing the transmission, is what we call social distancing, or others they called it the physical distancing from one person to the other. Now you can implement this exercise or try to understand which area in your company or in the compound of your company that the social distancing is critical. Okay, we are talking about like the offices. Okay, we need to take into consideration like how many workers can be accommodated in the offices. Okay, maybe prior to the pandemic, let's say in one office you have 10 staff, but when you try to understand the physical or the social distancing requirement, this 10 staff can no longer be accommodated, and we try to reduce it to 50% of occupancy. So this is one area that you need to look into. Now there are some literatures that says you need to have at least 2.5 square meter area for one worker, from 2.5 to 5 square meters. So it depends from your organization to organization. Other areas that you need to look into for the social distancing is when they enter to your company, is there a means of logging in, no, through their IDs or biometrics? So if there is this kind of queue or line in entering into your company, then this is one area that you need to implement a social distancing. Okay, so either you can put a stickers or markings on the floor to ensure that the social distancing is maintained by the workers. Okay, so or another option to in order for you uh, to limit the number of people, or in order for you to implement the social distancing, is of course to limit the business occupancy as a whole. Okay, because imagine if you have so many workers on site, although you have implemented this kind of markings on the floor, but the moment there is a big crowd in your company, then probably there's a feasibility that the social distancing will not be adhered to. So it will be clearly, what do you call this, violated, or not practically implemented. So you need to take this into consideration. So that's for social distancing. So another guiding principle in the document is stating that we need to identify and isolate sick employees. Okay. Now it doesn't mean that they are really sick. Okay. So it means that we need to identify the people, okay, or the staff in our organization who are having health issues, okay, or having health conditions that when they are exposed to the virus, the potential consequence of the exposure is fatal or very severe. Okay, so some they call this vulnerable people. Okay, now you can go to the definition of it. Okay, but simply when we talk about vulnerable people, it simply means that these are the people who have pre-existing conditions such as heart disease, hypertensive, respiratory diseases, immune system kind of diseases. So these are the people that we need to look into. Now, if we identify that we have this kind of people in our organization, the first consideration is, of course, to ask these people to stay at home. Now, this is very crucial because maybe some of our staff, their work or job description is simply cannot be executed when they are at home. So it's up to your company how you are going to deal with such people that cannot perform work because, like for example, a technician. No? He could not simply perform work at home because he is a technician. But let's say if he's an IT guy, or let's say an accountant guy or an admin guy, these people or staff can perform their duties or job while at home. So again, you need to take this into consideration. But when you restart your company, so these are the people that we are trying to protect, okay, because they are the most vulnerable. We need to eliminate the risk of these people from being exposed to the virus. So let them stay at home and let your company come up with a policy or a protocol on how you will manage such staff in your organization. Another guiding principle is returning to work after illness or exposure, or after an employee found positive with the virus. Okay, of course, there's always a complete recommendation or a self-quarantine recommendation after a person is being exposed to COVID-19. Okay, so there are certain number of protocols that is there available that you can refer to. Well, in most of the practice that I have learned through reading literatures is, of course, the 14 days quarantine is a part of that, and of course the testing, okay, of the presence of COVID virus in the system is also part of that. So if we would bring an employee to the workplace after he was being diagnosed, or after he was being exposed to the virus, I would recommend that he has to undergo test. Okay, let the test come out. Then if the test is already negative, and he has also like rendered the 14 days quarantine, and then I believe that he would no longer be a threat to the organization. Okay, I may be wrong, okay, because this kind of protocols is evolving from time to time. So, but currently, this is what most of the companies are practicing, and I think you can also take that into consideration. But of course, always go to the World Health Organization reference for the guidelines for self quarantine or quarantining or quarantined protocol for people who have been exposed to the virus. Of course, we talk about the first guiding principle, the hazard assessment. So this time there's a guiding principle for implementing controls. Now we already know the hierarchy of controls, right? So that includes engineering, safe work practices, administrative controls, and PPEs. So these are like the sort of controls that we can think of. Okay, so the engineering control can be in a form of a physical barrier or a shields to separate workers. Okay, and of course the enhanced ventilation. There are certain articles that are saying that you need to put in place HEPA filters to ensure that you get rid of the virus. There are also articles that says open your windows for fresh air circulation. There are so many things about the ventilations, but that's part of the engineering control. Another is, as I mentioned, is the administrative control. So wherein the consideration is need to be carefully evaluated by the company, because when we talk about administrative control, these are the staggering work shifts, okay, or the work rotation in the workplace, limiting the break room capacity, or designing the proper break times for every let's say sections or departments, so that you limit the time of you limit the number of people in a certain area or workplace. So that's an administrative. Of course, the practical social distancing, which we already discussed. The social distancing is actually, it falls actually under administrative control. The use of video conferencing for meetings rather than convening in one area. Or maybe you can say, if your meeting room capacity is 10, you limit the room capacity to 5, so that you maintain the 6 foot or 6 feet social distancing requirement. Again, it depends your company, because some references are saying 1 meter, some are saying 2 meters or 6 feet. So it's up to you guys what form of physical distancing you are going to maintain. But this belongs to the administrative thing. Okay. So what else? The last but not the least, no? The PPE. Of course, the requirement of face mask or the surgical mask, the requirement of gloves when we are handling what is this, people who are positive cases. Now the requirement of gloves may differ from company to company. Okay, if you are a health worker, obviously the requirement of mask, face shield, and gloves is a sort of a mandatory requirement. But if we are talking about industrial areas, wherein I would say mask would be the mandatory kind of thing, and the use of face shield and the gloves is subject to evaluation by your health and safety personnel or staff in your organization. But right now, I can say that the mandatory, okay, for a requirement for everyone is the wearing of mask. Again, you have to evaluate the requirement of other PPEs. Okay. Let me just say this. If, for example, if a work activity is done by more than 3 workers, then we would say the use of face shield can also be part of that, because like they will be handling a sort of an equipment that they will have to be there together, and the physical distancing will not be met. So the provision of a face shield can be part of that. Okay, but again, it is subject to your evaluation or part of your hazard assessment based on the job requirement or job description. Another guiding principle is the workplace flexibilities. Okay, so these are including those concerning remote work or sick leave. Okay, so as a company, we have to evaluate our existing policies, and if needed, consider new ones that facilitate appropriate use of telework. Okay, appropriate use of the leaves or sick leaves to our company, and of course other options that would help minimize our workers exposure or risks. Okay, Um, Part of this workplace flexibilities is to communicate about the workplace flexibilities policies and ensure workers understand how to make use of available options. Okay, for example, uh, the stress, no, how the stress is being managed, the fatigue management. This is more of the psychosocial kind of impact to the current situation that we are into. So your human resource, together with you, the health and safety department, has to really try to understand this requirement in your organization, because we know that there are people who are not into this, not so good with this kind of situation. So the company has to address that kind of scenarios. Okay, so let's take a look into that workplace flexibilities. Another guiding principle that is written in the guidance document is the anti-retaliation. Okay, so this includes practices, okay, for ensuring that no adverse or retaliatory action is taken against an employee who adheres to these guidelines or raises workplace safety concerns. Okay, so this is one of the workers actually rights, okay, under OSHA, but I don't know if in other countries this is applicable, but I suppose to it's an applicable one, because this is like an international labor organization requirement that people should not be discriminated, or people have the right to a safe and healthy and healthful workplace or working environment that they are working into. Of course, last but not the least, of all the things that we have mentioned, it will become useless if there is no training or no information dissemination of what are the guiding principles that you would want to implement in your company. At the end of the day, we need to ensure that these practices or these guidelines or these policies are received by your employees or workers, and they understand the content of it, and they know what is expected from them, and at the same time what is expected from the employers. So it should be clearly communicated, and the communication should be a two-way process. Okay, you need to get feedback from the workers, and at the same time you need to inform them and take into consideration their feedback and try to review again your health policies or health and safety policies and procedures that you would want the that you would want to be implemented in your organization. So training and information is very, very important. Probably I can say that the company should establish a sort of a policy in enforcing discipline, okay, and of course enforcing recognition, because I do believe that whatever policies and procedures that we are making, without this form of recognition and discipline, these policies and procedures will not be uh, successfully implemented. So now that's only my opinion and views. I may be wrong about it. We may differ in opinion about it, but this is what this is my personal view only. That for a policy and procedure to be successful in a company, you need to have that recognition policy, recognizing good contribution from the employees, recognizing good behavior from the employees, and of course there are also employees that does not follow the policy and procedure. We need also to discipline them. So like this is one way of enforcing or making ensure that our health and safety policies are successfully implemented in our organization. Thank you for staying with me in this video and for watching, and I hope that you learned something new today. And again, once again, I just continue to share this video, and I hope that you get to like the video